Hey everyone, we'll get started here in just a minute. James Jeffers is going to be with me here. We've got about 10 minutes before we get started. Thanks for being here, and we will get started right at 1 Eastern. Thank you very much. Hey, for those of you just joining us, we are not started yet. We're about 7 minutes until we get started here, so hang on tight. I'm glad you're here, and I'm excited about this today. Thanks. Hey, for those of you just joining us, we are not quite started yet. Thanks for being here. We've got about 6 minutes until we get going, and I appreciate your patience and look forward to this. It's going to be great. Thanks so much. Hey folks, we're just a few minutes away from getting started. I appreciate your patience. We'll get started right at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. Thanks for being here and looking forward to a good webinar today. Hey, we're almost there. We got about 1 minute left here and then we're going to get going. Thanks for your patience. All right, so welcome. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services. And if you've been here before, you're used to seeing me. I'm your host. Today we have a guest host, James Jeffers, a good friend of mine. We actually did a podcast together a while back called Reflection as a Service, and you can still go out and find it on SoundCloud and on the website, reflectionasaservice.com. Let me tell you a little bit about Beaufort Fairmont and who we are. We do test automation. We focus on how to help teams sync up dev and testing in agile environments. And also we help teams automate their regression testing. And we do that through training, consulting, and then hands-on project work. So if you need people to help you with this, either setting up a strategy or coming in and actually doing the work, we are the folks for you. We're having a terrific year, and there are a lot of folks that are interested in our services, but we're always looking for more customers and always looking for who we can help out. And we do these webinars as a service to you guys to help learn about different things. Several months ago, we had Angie Jones on, and she did a terrific talk about how to become a test automation engineer. And one of the big things that she mentioned in her 3 bullets, if you were here, you may remember this, one of her big 3 things was learn to program. And so I wanted to come back to you and start drilling down on some of those items. And one of those is learning to program. So James is a good friend of mine, and he is going to do this session about Intro to Python. So if you have not followed him yet on Twitter, he's at James J Consult. And also I'm at D Paul Merrill if you want to follow me on there as well. But James J Consult is who you need to follow. Always love your tweets during these. Always love to hear what people like and what they don't like. Couple things, I always like to tell you what's coming up and what's next. So the next webinar is going to be in April. We do these once a month. It'll probably be the 16th or the 23rd, and I believe Mary Thorne is going to be our guest speaker then, and she's going to get down into BDD and give you the nitty-gritty on behavior-driven development. So that's going to be wonderful. It'll be, again, probably a 1 o'clock start time, and we usually we'll probably do that on the 16th or 23rd. We're working out a date, but I'm very excited about that because Mary's terrific. She's been a keynote speaker at many of the top testing conferences and knows behavior-driven development inside and out. I'll be in Atlanta for Quality Jam in a matter of weeks, the 10th and 11th in April. Save 20% on that if you want with the code Merrill20. And then also I'll be in Star East down in Orlando at the end of the month and the beginning of May. So I look forward to seeing some of you there. I know that you want to dive into this once again, and so we're going to do that once again. The next webinar will be in April with Mary. As some of you know, I do a $50 Amazon card giveaway during this webinar. So stick around to the end, make sure that you're here. And if you're here, you have a chance to win the $50 Amazon gift card. So at last, I want to welcome James. James is, James, I dropped your bio. I didn't have it right here in front of me. I'm sorry about that. James is a software engineer with 20 years of experience. He's worked in many different roles. He's worked with Microsoft, he's worked with IBM. He's one of my favorite people to pair up with and either think deeply about software development. We've worked multiple times together on projects and helped several different companies move forward with their software development. And he is focusing on Python lately. He's got a really great website. James, what's the website?
It's jamesjeffersconsulting.com. And I've been writing a few blog posts about folks that would like to learn about programming, especially for Python.
Perfect. And he's had a lot of really great sessions there, a lot of really great blog posts. And he's going to dive into Python right here. I'm going to make him the presenter, and we're going to take off. Thanks so much for listening to the boilerplate stuff here. So James, I'm going to make you the presenter, and we're going to get going now. We're going to have a couple breaks for questions during the meantime. And I will have a survey afterwards. When you log out of GoToWebinar, there's going to be a survey where I would love to have your input. So to get started, James, before you get going, I know that we have a couple of polls. Let's just find out kind of where we are in some of this. And we're going to ask, how much programming have you done? If you guys would go ahead and vote for that, I'll show you the results here in just a minute. And this will help us kind of figure out exactly how far along we are and how to kind of tailor this. You guys everybody's voting. I love it. I love it when it gets, we're almost 80%. 80%, yes. I always love it when we get 8 out of 10 people doing this. Terrific. So here we go. I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share this with you all. So here are the results. It's 61% has done some programming, James, 20% none, and 19% have done many years of programming. So I'm going to hide those results, make you the presenter, and you are off. Thank you so much for being here, everybody, and enjoy the webinar.
All right, Paul. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure that I give you the right screen here. And the screen that you're looking at, are you seeing the full screen keynote, or are you seeing like the...
I'm actually not seeing it. Let me make sure that I've made you the presenter. Thanks for everybody's patience. We always...
There we go.
Have you got it now?
I think so.
Okay.
All right.
All right, folks, drop a note in the questions if you don't see something here.
Yeah,
Thanks.
let us know. Okay, well, as Paul mentioned, I'm James Jeffers, and I've been writing automation code for testing since way before it was cool, mostly out of necessity. A lot of agile teams, we didn't have a dedicated tester, but we still wanted to write test code. So I found myself having to write the test myself. And of course, I was going to run these tests manually. I wanted to make sure to, make the machines do that. And so one of the tools that I picked up was Python. So today I'm going to talk about learning how to program and using Python as a language of choice. So I do want to mention at the end of my presentation, I'm going to give you guys a link. And at the end of that link, it's going to have a link to my blog. And on that page, it's going to be a download link, not only for the slides, but also a short free guide for how to get started learning how to program in Python. As Paul mentioned, there was a webinar a few weeks ago by Angie Jones. She was an automation engineer for Twitter. And in her webinar, she actually had a really good summary about the sort of things it would take to become a test automation engineer. And she said that a test automation engineer is a person with a developer skill set with a tester's mindset. And I thought, yeah, that's really nicely encapsulates what it takes to become a test automation engineer. And I think a lot of people don't understand that development is a skill. So you have to learn development. That means you have to learn how to write and understand software. Now, this introduces a whole bunch of other issues. If you've never programmed before, you may not know, where to start. But what language do I pick? There seems like you could pick up a rock and throw it on the internet, and you're going to get back dozens of results for different programming languages. Should you pick Java? It's pretty popular. It's been around for a long time. How about Ruby? It's got its own particular strengths, lots of great web frameworks. What about JavaScript? C#? I mean, there's so much to think about. Sometimes you're just not sure. And for a person who's just starting out, this can be completely overwhelming. I'm going to make the case today that Python is an excellent choice as a programming language to learn. And one of the things you might be thinking, well, the shop that I'm in, they don't really use Python. Why would I pick Python? I think Python really makes a great choice for reasons that I'm going to get into. But think about this. Sometimes when you're learning a new language, like say, if you speak English, but you want to learn French, it takes a lot of effort to learn that second language. But once you learn the second language, picking up the third one's a lot easier because you have a lot of reference points about, this is how this language was different from the one they already knew. So when you go to another new language, suddenly it becomes much easier because you kind of know this is how languages differ. I think the same thing is kind of true if you're picking up Python and you really want to delve into other languages, just learning Python first is really going to help. So the person who created Python is Guido van Rossum, and before he actually got around to creating Python, he was experimenting with different things, and he conceived of Python as a programming language that he could teach to smart people who weren't necessarily themselves computer programmers. And I think, again, this is another reason why Python makes for an excellent first language. It was designed for people that are smart, who know their way around a computer, but aren't necessarily programmers. Another reason why you might want to consider Python is its popularity. As you can see from these bullet points, there's lots of data points to suggest that Python, it's been popular in the past and it seems to be trending upwards. Last year, GitHub had a report where they said that they looked at all the pull requests, that is all of the changes that people are submitting to different projects. Python was number 2. Indeed.com looked at job postings and they found that it was the 3rd most desired language because this is what the employers were asking for, which kind of suggests that that's what a lot of teams are using. And of course, IEEE had a ranking where it said it was the number 1 language of last year, beating out C and Java, which is actually kind of impressive. They used a bunch of different metrics to come up with those rankings. But the point is, if you look at Python, it's extremely popular. In fact, if you go to the Learning Python subreddit, I think there's like over 110,000 people subscribed to that subreddit. So there's a lot of folks with eyes on Python right now. So as far as like a good tool to have for your career, I think this is probably one of the better ones. There's a couple things about Python that make it attractive for people just learning how to program, and that it's one of its design tenets is that it's simple. A lot of languages, and I'm not saying this just to pick on Ruby, but because I have a Ruby background myself. And one of the things that a lot of people like about Ruby is that there's more than one way to do something. In fact, its flexibility is considered by a lot of people to be one of its big strengths. But that flexibility comes at a cost. If you're someone who's just starting out, if you see that there's 20 different ways to do something, it can be confusing to figure out, well, what's the best way? Well, Python kind of avoids a lot of that confusion by a design aesthetic that there's always a preferable way to do it, an obvious way to do it. And that makes it super simple and a lot less confusing to learn. And also the Python community has this really great aesthetic about trying not to be too clever. You see a lot of languages where the syntax is very compact, and people pride themselves on their one-line programming wonders, which makes you feel great if you're kind of into that, but it makes it hard to read, and it's sometimes difficult for other people to kind of figure out what the intention of what your program is. And Python, their goal is not to be clever. It's not considered to be a compliment, something to brag about. It's much better to be clear. Again, a great advantage if you're just learning how to program. Oh, I just lost my presentation. Okay. Let me know. Does everybody still see the slides?
Yeah, we're good, James.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going then. Python, as I mentioned, because it's relatively simple and it's readable. Why is it readable? Well, Python enforces the structure of the language through white space. So you can look at a Python program, and the indentation of the program will tell you that different parts of code belong logically to other parts. In some languages, like for example, C or Java, there's no hard and fast rules about how to structure what the program looks like when you're looking at the text in an editor. You can put your braces and your tabs and your spaces pretty much depending on whatever your team likes to use. So when you go from team to team, this can change. And so it takes a while to acclimate to whatever group you're working with, or sometimes based on the project that they're not consistent. Again, for a beginner, this can be confusing. You can spend a lot of time just learning that rather than the language itself. But in Python, it's always very consistent. The other thing about Python that's really nice is that it likes to use expressive English terms. You'll see words like print, for, if, and so on. And there's a list of keywords. Again, when I send you the slides, all of these underlined links are actually hyperlinked so that you can use them for reference later. I came up with a simple Python program. And again, this presentation is presented for people that don't have Python experience and want to learn more about it. And the expectation is not that those folks are going to look at this program and understand it, but I think you can kind of read it and you can sort of get a rough understanding of exactly what a Python program would look like. And just by reading some of the keywords, you can kind of understand what it might be doing. And you can see the indentation I was talking about earlier. Again, actually breaking down exactly what the syntax of this program is not really the focus. It's just to give you an idea that this is what a standard Python program is. Now, the standard Python install is going to come with a command line interpreter, as well as you can get different integrated development environment tools. There's like PyCharm, idle. These are tools that you can set up and you can work in like a windowed environment. You can interact with the Python language, but I'm going to show you an example where just from the command line, you can run a Python program. In fact, we're going to run this one. I have a short educational film, and here we go. So I'm showing you the listing of the program, and then I just type in the Python command along with the name of the file, and the program starts. And you can see this is running this program, which you basically try to guess a number. If you guess the correct number, there we go. Okay, you win. And that's it. That's the entire experience behind running a Python program. There really isn't a distinct compilation step that the user would recognize like you would for some other languages like C. So again, the quickness and feedback for developing in Python for beginner, I think is a huge advantage over other more strictly compiled languages. Some other things about Python, why I think it makes a great first tool, is that it's an extremely productive language. What do I mean by that? Well, Python, as a programmer, I can get a lot more done with writing a lot less code. And this, has this sort of design principle of batteries included. So with a Python standard library, there's a lot of things that come with it. So for example, this is a sample snippet of some Python code that would open a file, some text file, go through it line by line, and print out those lines. I'm going to show you another program that's written in the C language. Now, this is a standard C program for doing basically the same thing, opening a file, going through that file and printing every line out. And I got to ask you, Paul, which one do you think looks easier to type out and get going with, right?
Well,
Python or C?
I was laughing as soon as I saw the 4 lines there because I've done it in other languages. I knew exactly how long it was going to take. So absolutely the one on the right.
Yeah. So again, like I said, as you get more experience with different programming languages, there may be very good reasons why you would pick a language that obviously is far more specific and you have to do a lot more things. Maybe you want more fine-grained control, but as a beginning languages or a language you just need to get things done, Python, this is a great strength. Another reason why Python is very productive is that if you're looking to do something and you're not quite sure, like, gosh, do I have to write this web framework by hand? Do I have to write this numerical computation by hand? Chances are someone else has already written a Python package that you can use. It's already out there. There are literally tens of thousands of Python packages available for you to download. Almost all of them have a very generous license that you can use for commercial, non-commercial uses. And Python installs come with a package management tool called pip. So essentially, all you're doing is using this pip tool to tell your local environment, hey, I'd like to use these other packages in my local Python program. Again, saves you lots of time. Someone else has probably already written the thing that you're thinking about writing. So you can spend more time solving problems than banging your head against the wall. As far as test automation goes, Python's got you there as well. We talk about the standard test automation pyramid. At the very, very top, the very narrow part, you've got your UI, your end-to-end tests. In the middle, you might have the service layer tests, and the very bottom, unit tests. Well, Python's got support for these things as well. The most popular UI testing framework that's available is Selenium, which Python provides bindings for. So essentially, all of these manual tests where you would say, well, navigate to a page, log in, see that the widget shows up, check to see that the page, has the data you expect. You can use a tool like Selenium, and with Python, you can actually write tests that will be run whenever you need them to automate this web interaction. At the very bottom level, and even some of the middle level, there's lots of unit test libraries that you can choose from. There's PyTest, unit test, and so on. And there's a bunch of other libraries too for mocking and whatnot. And I think as you go into some of Paul's other webinars about test automation, you kind of understand how those tools might be used. But I'll just say that if you're going to pick Python as a programming language and with the intent of becoming a test automation engineer, you're not going to be left in the cold. This is definitely a tool that you can use to do test automation. That's kind of a whirlwind tour through the sort of the arguments for picking Python as a programming language, especially if you want to become a test automation engineer. I did mention that I've developed a free guide that you can download. And if you go to the URL here, jamesjeffersconsulting.com/BFMT-intro-Python, there are 2 links on that page, and you can download the slides for this presentation as well as that free guide. And that's basically it. Paul, do we have any questions?
I think we will. So here's what usually happens, folks. Start typing your questions now. If you don't mind being on the webinar in front of 170 some odd people speaking, then go ahead and raise your hand and I'll try to identify you. But type them in, and James, usually what happens is it takes a little bit for people to type in your questions. It may be good while we're waiting to go back to where you had the code up for that guessing game. And maybe you could just walk us through, if you don't mind. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if you could just kind of walk us through each of the lines in that program. We have a couple questions here coming in while you're getting that going, if you're okay with that.
Yes.
So first, Arnab asks, did you run this program in the command line or in idle?
This guessing program, that was the command line.
Okay, great. And then let's see. Why don't you walk us through this as people are typing in questions? We are getting a few here. You guys keep typing, and we'll get back to you in just a minute.
Sure. So whenever you run a Python program, your Python, it'll basically parse the entire text file from top to bottom. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that it will execute from all of the items that have been defined, Because, for example, the very first line is that DEF. You're basically telling Python, hey, I'm going to define a function called main. Don't run it yet, but if you keep it around in memory. And it'll consume the definition for that function, put it in memory. At the very bottom, we have an actual executable line. It's the comparison between the underscore name underscore against another string, which is underscore main underscore. And what this does, it basically says if you're importing this Python file into the interpreter, all the programs that run will have these symbols attached to each one. And basically it's saying, hey, if this file is actually being run as a separate program, we've basically identified this as the program we want to run, as opposed to being imported into another program. And so if that's the case, it'll evaluate to true. It'll actually execute the next line, which is that main parentheses, open and close. And that says, hey, that main function that you defined that we've been keeping around in memory, go ahead and execute it. At that point, execution will jump back to that very first line in the program. And it starts. So the very first thing you saw was, hey, we're going to print this string, guess a number between 1 and 100. And we saw that. And then it defines another couple of variables within this function. One would be the random number that we're saying, hey, try to guess. It's going to be 3. And then we set a flag that says found is false. And this becomes important because the next thing you see is a while loop. And the while loop basically tests that found variable to say, while not found, meaning as long as that's false, keep running this inner loop, this next indented code. And the user guess is taken from the value of the input. And you saw that input, it basically prints your guess and then expects the user to provide input. Whatever is inputted then is used. Next thing it does is it compares your guess against that random number. If it's true, it says, hey, you won. Sets found to be true. It'll skip the else because we already tested if user guess equals random number. It skips the else, goes back up, starts at the top of the loop again while not found. Well, we already said found to true, so it's going to exit. Now, if you got it wrong, the if would skip the print and the found equal true and move down to the else. And it would print, hey, wrong, guess again, loop back up to the top, found would still be false, and it would continue. And that's the basic execution there. Paul, do we have another question?
That's great. Yeah, we do. So Nico asks, and forgive me if I'm messing up your name, folks. I'm reading them the best I can here. Which would you recommend learning, Python 2.7 or 3.6?
That's actually a really great question. So I think it depends. All other things being equal, I would learn Python 3.6. I think there are plans to deprecate support for Python 2.7. So looking forward, you probably get more mileage out of 3. But here's the thing, like a lot of languages, just because they've ended support for it, you might find yourself in a situation where, let's say you have to test code or you have to understand code that was written in 2.7. So I don't think it's going to be a terrible thing to learn it, but I think if you've got, if you're just starting out and you just want to, hit the ground running and not have to worry about different versions, just go with 3 for now. That'd be my advice.
That's great. Yeah. So, to me, one of the biggest pieces of these things is learning from other people and hearing their questions, because they're going to come up with things that you and I haven't even thought of. So here's one from Hossein, and he asks, how much Python do you need to learn to start being productive with Selenium?
How much Python? Well, that's another really good question. I would say you could probably start writing Selenium scripts pretty quickly. There are a lot of really good tutorials dealing specifically with Selenium, and I think if you just followed them, you could do all right. So maybe a few weeks worth. The issue, though, comes that Selenium, Paul, as you know, has its own little pitfalls about, everything's fine until something goes wrong, and then you're sitting there wondering, why didn't I capture this event? Why didn't I find that element on the page? And in that case, you probably want maybe a bit more Python experience than just very raw beginner, because you want to be able to drill down into your Selenium driver code and try to figure out what exactly is going wrong. So I guess the short answer is, yeah, you can get started with it pretty quickly, within a few weeks, I would think, for most people. but you definitely want to have the depth of experience with Python to be able to figure out when things go wrong, where should you look next?
Great, great. So there are a lot of questions here. I'm trying to tease through them and find ones that everyone might want to know. So here's Farzad, and he asks, are there any types of software projects where you would not want to use Python? Any limitations?
Yeah, and I would definitely think of one. I think let's say you're going into an environment where you're the only person who would be using Python, and everybody else is using, say, Java. I think that clearly, you probably want to use a tool that everyone else is going to be comfortable with and understands. Now, could you go to them and say, "Hey, I'd like to start using some Python, and here's some advantages for it. Maybe get some interest in using that as a new tool." Yeah, I think you could. I just think from a cultural perspective, sometimes it's easier to use the tool that everyone else is using. There's some other concerns about Python performance in certain, say, resource-intensive situations, but certainly there's a large community of people that use Python for number crunching. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is, yeah, there are some situations where you wouldn't want to use it, but I think they're more cultural than anything else.
That's great. So several people have asked questions about what platforms Python runs on. I think you touched on that a little bit, but what OSs does it run on?
So here's the thing about Python, as long as that platform has a Python implementation, you can run it. So for example, I run Python on Linux, all different distributions, anything from like SUSE Linux. I've run it on Red Hat Linux or CentOS. I've run it on Gentoo. I've run it on Mac OS X, Windows. I'm trying to think of what else. Pretty much, and I think Python's pretty ubiquitous as far as platforms. Oh, I've also run it under Windows, the Windows Ubuntu shell for driving some Ansible tools. So pretty much everywhere.
That's great. And then there's a couple questions about automation tools other than Selenium on Python.
Like I said, well, most of the automation tools that I've used are something like a PyTest, and there's a couple of satellite options to use with your testing framework. Like I've used the Tox testing tool, which basically helps you run tests in a consistent environment. But that's I wonder if they mean specifically like as far as like driving web tests.
I think that was part of it. There's some other questions about BDD. I know that there is a Behave that's also available in Python. Let's see. I believe that's one of them as well. But yeah, there are a number of different platforms in Python from what I've seen. A number of different frameworks.
Right. Yeah, there are BDD frameworks for Python as well.
Great. So let's see. Let me see if I can get somebody who's got their hand up here. So I'm going to open this question up to Amr. And Amr, I'm going to take you off of mute. Amr, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can.
Hey, did you have a question?
Hey. Yeah. This is specifically around the interfaces that we have been using right now for like Cucumber and Selenium. So I would like to hear something like what advantages this particular Python will have over the Cucumber and Selenium in terms of compatibility and how it behaves with the interfaces.
Great question.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out if I understood the question correctly. You think you can re-summarize that, Paul?
Yeah, I'm going to take him off of mute too. I think basically it sounds like he's working in Amr, correct me, I've taken you off of mute, but it sounds like you're using Cucumber. Is that with Ruby right now?
Right now, I think, yeah, we are using the Java.
Java.
Java and
Yeah, so right now you've got Java running with Cucumber, so it's the Cucumber JVM tool, and then you've got WebDriver tied in with Java as well, right, Amr?
Yes.
Okay. Does that help you more, James?
Yeah, it does. So I think that as long as I don't think there's an official Cucumber binding in Python. So I'm not real sure if there's a one-to-one correlation between the two. I would be surprised if there wasn't something that was pretty close, but I don't know that necessarily answers your question. I think if you were going to switch away from whatever you're using now in Cucumber to go to Python, there's probably going to be some friction there. I don't think there's an official Cucumber binding.
Okay, great. So you mentioned a few IDEs earlier. What were those?
Well, PyCharm is one, which is made by JetBrains. I think it's free. There are optional professional upgrades you can use for it, but you don't have to. The other one is Idle, which I recall that's actually bundled with some of the Python installers. And that's an IDE that you can run. I've used that on Windows and I've used that on Mac OS X. Another one, which I know some folks really enjoy, especially in the Windows world, is Visual. The Visual Studio people made, I think it's Visual Code, which is a decent option if you like that ecosystem. And it has a Python sort of optional packages you can install, which is really helpful. A lot of shops, what they like to do is set up a linting step. And so once you know what the linting rules are, you basically run this check against your source code before you would check it in. And it will basically flag your code if it violates style basically style patterns that your team has set up to kind of keep all the code consistent. Well, if you have to run that by hand every single time, it gets kind of tedious. So a lot of these IDEs will allow you to specify, hey, here are the rules that we're going to use. And it will sort of scan your code as you're typing it and flag it in the IDE and let you know, hey, this line doesn't adhere to the standards that you set up. You're going to need to fix it. So that's often very, very helpful.
That's great. That's great. So we have so many questions. We're not going to be able to get to them all, but I am going to go with a few more. And we want to do some polls here as well. Why don't I do a poll while I'm asking this question? Maybe you can answer at the same time. One of the, let's see, what is your current role is the poll that I'm going to launch. So if you guys will just take a minute to fill that out. The question that I have here is from Johanna, and she asks, I started learning to code using JavaScript. I was asked a question which I wasn't sure how to answer. Basically, I was just looking for a tool to help me move into a software development and test path, software development engineer and test path. Any thoughts on the best route for this or even how to start? I currently do a lot of web service and UI testing, which are time consuming. So looking for a path to get into software development and test.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think Python's a great way to do it, and I've known people that that Python is their primary tool. But I think if she's already started with JavaScript, that's certainly a way to do it as well. It kind of depends. If your test automation is front end, let's say you want to write for front end JavaScript code, maybe JavaScript might be an advantage because there are frameworks like Jasmine, which are specifically designed for front end JavaScript testing. But Python has the advantage that it's got enough sort of tools that allow it to be used at different layers in that testing pyramid. So I don't think there's necessarily a wrong choice there. But I mean, I have my own biases to why I think Python is probably stronger, in my opinion.
Okay, great. And you noticed on the poll there, a lot of testers here, folks who haven't done a lot of programming, a few that have. And I appreciate you guys answering that very much. So we have a couple other things here where people are asking about mobile apps and whether or not Python is a good choice to automate testing with mobile apps.
Yeah, that is a good question. Actually, I've never done mobile testing with Python before, so I'm not sure I could be a good source for that. But that's interesting.
Yeah, that's great. We'll have to get somebody with mobile experience on here, somebody that's deep into that and who's used a lot of different tools. What about data science and data analytics? So here's another question. Why is Python so embraced by the data science analytics domain?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the reasons is because, again, when they were building Python as a tool, it was primarily designed for scientists or for really smart folks that needed to manipulate computer systems, but they weren't actually programmers. So I think you'll find a lot of parts of Python were kind of custom built for smart people that aren't necessarily having development backgrounds. And I know that there's quite a few data crunching packages for Python like NumPy. And it does a really nice job of handling large floating point numbers and large data sets. So as far as why, I just think it was culturally built into Python. It's just one of the things that it was designed to help people get, be efficient with those kind of tasks.
That's great. So we're going to wrap up here with one more question. I'm also going to launch a poll as we're talking through this. So the poll is, what challenges is your team facing with automated testing? So if you can take a moment and answer that. And I have a question here from Thomas C. And it says, if you desire to eventually be able to use Selenium with Python, should you make the effort to learn Python very first and then try to use it with Selenium, or try using both at the same time on a very simple website?
I think you can do both at the same time, but I think it really depends on how comfortable you are with picking up new languages. If you've never programmed anything before, I would definitely tell you, learn the Python first, get some competence and some confidence doing that, and then you can pick up the Selenium, and you probably pick it up pretty rapidly. If you're somebody who's like worked in other languages before, or if you have an extensive Selenium background in another language, you could probably just start with Selenium and use that as your entry point. But if you're just starting out and you don't know how to program and you need to learn how to program first, start with the Python language first. And then when you feel comfortable, then move into using Selenium with it.
That's great. So here's an answer to our poll. What challenges is your team facing with test automation? And skills, number one. And that's why we're doing this, because we want to help out with skills. And it's a big reason why Beaufort Fairmont exists in general, and why you have such a great resource in your download that you've offered here for these folks. So that was a great last question. I'm going to close out this poll. You guys have been terrific. James, is there anything you want to leave us with? Any last comments or anything before we do this giveaway for Amazon gift card?
Yes. I actually wanted to throw up this thing right here, which is the link. It's right here at the bottom, jamesjeffersconsulting.com/BFMT-intro-Python. So if folks want to get the slides of the free guide, that's where it is.
I think your slides went down, your screen went down when you did that. But if you could copy that, can you copy that link into the chat session in here so that people have it, and copy it out to everyone? And then anyone can just click on it. That would be great. So wonderful resource there. jamesjeffersconsulting.com/MT-intro-Python. James, I really appreciate it. I know. So guys, being in front of 170 people, maybe 180 people at one point, that takes a lot of courage, and I appreciate you doing it. James, thanks so much for being here. Did a terrific job. And James, would you be open to some questions if I send you some of the unanswered ones after this to look at and respond to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Great. So if you didn't get your questions answered, you can always reach James. And how can they reach you in addition to the link there?
They probably the Twitter handle is good, James J Consult.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. So we now. Hey, have I been talking to myself this whole time?
Only for a few seconds, I think.
All right, so we got to figure out who's going to get this giveaway. So let me share my screen here, and let's make sure that we are ready for this. I know everybody is excited. We do this every month. Got to make sure my sharing is right here.
Do you have a drum roll?
Presenter. Well, just 1 second. You're skipping ahead on me here. How do I make? That's not what I want to do. Where did my screen share go here, James? You might have to share it back to me.
Oh, okay. Let me do change presenter.
Oh, here we go. I think
you got it? All right.
I've got it. Yep. Okay. So who is going to win? Hold on. Let me do this just the right way. All right. Who is going to win? Can you hear it? Oh, it didn't do it. Hold on. I've got a drum roll this time. I had a drum roll, James. I had it. I was so glad I had someone send me a drum roll, and here it is. Hold on. All right. And the winner is Ken M. So there was only one Ken M on the call. And Ken, you are the winner of the giveaway here, the $50 Amazon gift card. So glad that everybody could be here. Thank you all so much. Once again, if you want to talk through your challenges with test automation, please give me a call at this number, or let's set up a time. Email me, paul@beaufortfairmont.com. My Twitter handle is there, dpaulmerrill. And ask me about office hours. These webinars, you'll get an email about the next one. Really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much, James, for being here.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure, Paul. I'm happy to help out, and I'm especially happy to see so many people with this interest.
Yeah, and keep writing about it, because I think your blog is just terrific with all this stuff on it for Python. So everybody have a wonderful Monday. And if you're in this area, if you're in North Carolina, watch out for this 3 inches of snow. We're going to get Snowpocalypse Part 3. Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys later. Thanks so much and have a good day.
Bye.